Line 3 is the new Keystone XL pipeline. If built, the carbon emissions from this pipeline are going to be equal to 50 coal plants every year, every single year. And the carbon footprint of this pipeline alone should be concerning to everybody in the country. This is not just a Minnesota issue, which is why health and science professionals have been warning Minnesota's agencies for several years now.
As a physician, if a patient came to me with alcoholic liver disease or COPD, I wouldn't encourage them to expand or increase the amount of alcohol they drink, nor the amount of tobacco they use. And it's a similar situation here.
I'm a fourth-year medical student.
Second-year medical student.
Current medical student and future physician.
I'm a clinical health psychologist. A medical student and a future physician.
A medical student and future physician.
It is the professional opinion of unbiased scientists and doctors throughout the state that this pipeline will further tie our great state to a future fueled by carbon rather than clean energy alternatives.
This oil does not need to come out of the ground. Contrary to what Enbridge argues, this pipeline will not benefit Minnesota. It will not bring us jobs. The oil will be shipped overseas, and the profits will not go into our economy.
Here in Minnesota, we see some of the worst racial health disparities in the entire country. Continuing to make decisions that perpetuate unmitigated climate change is only going to further widen those gaps.
I'm always thinking about questions like, are patients and their families able to rely on fresh food sources and clean water? Are they in their community safely sheltered? Are they breathing clean air? Do their children have access to safe green spaces?
We cannot continue to exacerbate the climate change crisis through the increased utilization of oil-based products and the destruction of our natural resources.
We have to leave that oil in the ground, and building new pipelines is only encouraging more development and more fossil fuel emissions.
I advocate for and look forward to a future where no water permits for Line 3 will ensure that we are not polluting the sacred land and water of our Native American communities.
Please protect your children and your grandchildren and deny these permits.
We all ask Governor Walz to listen to our health professionals, to listen to our scientists, to listen to Minnesotans. Minnesota deserves a healthy future. Throughout this process, science has been sidelined and frontline voices have been ignored. The day the IPCC report came out, this pipeline should have been stopped. The day over 100 medical organizations said that climate change is a health emergency, this pipeline should have been stopped. When 12 out of 17 Environmental Justice Committee members resigned, calling this pipeline a war on Black and brown people, that day this pipeline should have been stopped. But we're still here. And today, we're calling on President Biden and his administration to revoke the permits and stop Line 3.
Well, hello and welcome everyone. While we're still maybe waiting for some folks to keep filtering in, we wanted to give you an opportunity to see some of what we're going to be discussing a bit in this webinar that you've come to tonight. Work that health professionals have been doing around opposition to the Line 3 tar sands pipeline in Minnesota. I'm Brenna Tahani. I'm the Executive Director of Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. We are an organization of health professionals of all kinds who organize in the state of Minnesota around the health impacts of climate change. We believe that climate change is a health emergency, and we think that it's very important for us as health professionals to use our trusted voice to educate our community and the public and policymakers about these health threats, so that we can work together to take action and find solutions that will help us to preserve the health of current and future generations in our state and beyond. I am very fortunate that we have with us tonight the Midwest Tar Sands coordinator for Minnesota 350, an organization that's been involved in this work from the very beginning and has done a fantastic amount of coalition building and generating resources that are really helpful for educating everybody about this issue. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andy Pearson. And Andy, feel free to tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we're so grateful that you're here to join us and tell us more about this issue.
Great, Brenna, thank you so much to all the hosts for having us on and for turning your attention today to the issue of Enbridge pipelines in the Great Lakes region, Line 3 and Line 5. It's such a huge issue, and one that's been going on for a long time and is also in really critical points for both of these fights right now. I'm going to focus in on Line 3. Like Brenna said, my name's Andy, he, him pronouns. I've worked at Minnesota 350 in the Minneapolis area for just over 7 years, and most of that time has been fighting Line 3. Project was proposed almost exactly 7 years ago. We'll just kind of advance through the slides here, Abby, if you're good to just go on. Thank you so much. What's the Line 3 project? Some of you are familiar with this. The project that we're talking about is a pipeline. It's currently under construction across northern Minnesota, and it would carry tar sands oil extracted up in Canada and Alberta to Superior, Wisconsin, and points south as well as points east, including the Gulf Coast and foreign markets. Let's hop on to the next slide. For those of us in Minnesota, this picture probably looks very like a familiar type of landscape. You know, northern pine forest, really wet, really green. This is up in Alberta, in the area that tar sands is extracted from. So if we think of this as a before, why don't we go to the next slide for the after, or the during, I should say. The after looks more like desert. This is the oil we're talking about. It's one of the dirtiest petroleum products made and one of the least efficient in terms of the energy return on energy invested, to the point where the extractive process, that, as you can see, is super destructive of land and water, consumes so much energy. They've talked about building nuclear plants up there just to heat the water to steam the tar out of the sand, which is below the northern boreal forest. It's a really bad deal. It's really inefficient, and it also turns huge areas of that part of the world and the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation into sacrifice zones and deserts. So the product itself is no good deal. Let's move on to the next slide. One of the issues with Alberta oil is that it's landlocked, right? It just can't get out of there without being moved some great distance across land, since most oil is moved by water for long distances. That's why you see this pipeline network. This is the US-Canadian pipeline network. You can see the large red line there that runs through Minnesota. You can also see Line 5 kind of cutting across the Upper Peninsula, and you can see the crossing there on that line as well. Like I said, I'll mostly focus on Line 3. Yeah, you can go on to that next slide. That was great. Thanks. So Enbridge already has a set of pipelines, one of which is called Line 3. That's part of the Enbridge mainline corridor. That's the upper orange line you see on the map. That was built in the 1960s, and it's getting pretty old. So Enbridge wants to replace it with a new line, but it's not really a replacement. And you can see that in the map. You know, they want to put it in a different place, in a new corridor where there aren't any Enbridge pipelines, through hundreds of wetlands and prime wild rice watersheds and the 1855 treaty territory. And the new pipeline is also larger than the old one. So for us, it's not a replacement. Let's go to the next slide. I want to talk about the climate damage. You know, Line 3 has been fought since the day it was proposed back in 2014. We've gone through years of legal and regulatory process, and those processes have mostly found that the line is a bad idea. They found it would carry the same climate damage as 50 coal plants, or 287 billion with a B dollars in social costs from climate change, over 50 years. So just imagine 50 coal plants. We'd never build that these days. This is how the emissions stack up relative to the entire kind of Minnesota economy-wide emissions. That's the purple bar. Line 3 is the red bar. So if you think about if we were able to get our whole entire economy in Minnesota down to zero emissions, take out electricity, transportation, industry, everything else, all zero emission, but we built line 3, we'd be worse off on climate than we are today. Next slide. Just a visual on the 50 coal plants. 50 is a number we can all grasp. 38 million vehicles is a little bit harder. But just to underline the massive scale of this project, I think if a Canadian company came and said, we want to build 50 coal plants in Minnesota, we'd say, well, you should get back to Canada with that idea, because we're not going to do that. Next slide. One of the other huge impacts of this project is on Indigenous communities who live, in many places along the path of that new corridor where Enbridge would like to build. And we can note that, they're not putting it through areas where, it's larger cities where mostly non-native folks live. They're putting it through the places that they can here, and it, like I said, it crosses treaty territory. What you see here is a picture of gathering wild rice. It's traditional practice. Crosses 40 some odd wild rice connected waters, and in addition to the treaty territory opposition, it's also had opposition from Native nations who have taken it to court. And there's presently 3 Indigenous nations that are in court against the project. Next slide. And it also has significant water impacts. These are some of the most sensitive waters in the state that the pipeline would cross, includes the headwaters of the Mississippi River. What we've done with this map is we've taken the likely spill radius out of the environmental impact statement for the project, and we've just turned those waters black within that spill radius. If you can imagine that happening, it really is it's potential damage at a scale that's almost hard to imagine. And as you can see there, it does come into the mouth there of Lake Superior, as a mouth of the St. Louis River, which is feeding into Lake Superior. That you can see it at the tip of the lake. Next slide. So what's the process that's gotten us here, and where are we now? Even the judge who ran most of the regulatory process concluded that Enbridge's proposal didn't meet Minnesota law and the pipeline shouldn't be built. Unfortunately, an unelected government body called the Public Utilities Commission of Minnesota, or the PUC, approved it anyway. And they included a lot of the data in front of them, all these climate and treaty impacts. They even, took public comments, and 94% of public commenters, or 68,000 people, told them not to approve it, but they did it anyway. You can see here some of the things that have happened recently. State legislators in opposition, the Environmental Justice Advisory Group collapsing after the water permits were issued, and our governor and lieutenant governor in Minnesota essentially split on this. And a lot of groups took the Public Utilities Commission to court after that decision, and that's where we are now. So that's 3 Native nations, a bunch of grassroots groups, and even Minnesota's own Department of Commerce, which is a state agency, because they say that Enbridge never showed that the pipeline was actually needed. These are really promising lawsuits, and they deserve a chance to be heard in court. And until they are, the process isn't done. But these lawsuits won't be finished until next summer. And so we need the pipeline to be stopped now. Our governor really could have done something here. He could have denied important water permits or barred Enbridge from getting started during a pandemic, like was mentioned in the video we saw earlier, but he has accelerated the process instead. Let's go to the next slide. What we've seen is a response of overwhelming community opposition. I want to specifically mention and give such a huge shout out of gratitude to the leaders who have been running resistance camps and treaty camps along the proposed path of the pipeline. Those are just the names of 5 of them. You can find them on Facebook. There's been actions in the metro. There's been actions up north. Over 100 people arrested, taking direct action, putting their bodies on the line. And again, this is all so avoidable, right? This is a pipeline that the studies have shown shouldn't be built, and that's currently in court with a whole lot of folks saying it's illegal, including a state agency and 3 sovereign nations. We should not be here, and we are here. And it's a shameful thing that we're here. Let's go on to the next page. So that brings us to my last slide here, which is just what comes next. Where do we go from here? Thankfully, there's a really easy thing that President Biden could do. I know nothing's easy at the national level. This is about as easy as we get because it's very similar to what happened with Keystone XL. Executive decision, he could revoke the water crossing permits and start a federal environmental impact statement that would stop construction. It would allow everybody to be heard in court. That court date is June 21st, incidentally my birthday. Fingers crossed for a good birthday gift that day from the courts. Still a possibility for a federal injunction. That would be an order stopping construction. Those are unlikely. And then it's the work of us all who are advocates, who are scientists, who are medical professionals, right? It's the ways that we raise our voices, that we bring resistance forward, that we do our organizing, we stand up, we lend our expertise, and we lend our mutual aid. And sometimes we lend our physical presence up north along the line. So with that, that wraps up my part. I'll be around for questions and looking forward to the rest of the discussion today. And Brenna, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Andy. And we also definitely hope that you might have some issues on your birthday coming up this year. But we really appreciate that overview. That definitely gives everybody a lot more perspective on this issue. And Andy did reference some of what's happening right now on the front lines in Minnesota, that there are camps that have been organized by Indigenous leaders who are water protectors, who are doing amazing work, just calling attention to what is happening and how this is a violation of their culture and sovereignty. We were hoping to have some water protectors join us this evening to speak directly to their experiences. And I think unless I missed you joining the call by just the weirdness of working in Zoom, that we didn't have anybody able to join us tonight. This is largely because it is an ever-evolving situation on the ground with folks who are literally camping in tents and other structures in the Minnesota winter, and creating community and caring for each other and dealing with a lot of issues that are happening in those communities around surveillance and opposition that they're facing from Enbridge. So we're definitely going to provide some resources to folks on this call of how you can help to support frontline efforts if that is something that you're interested in. And hopefully we'll find other ways to share those voices and experiences with the health professional community so we can all learn more about what we could be doing to help support those efforts. But so along that vein, we wanted to give a better overview of why, in fact, this is a health issue, in case there are any questions at this point about why health professionals should be concerned about tar sands pipelines and about this Line 3 project. So I am very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Conor Nath, who is a medical student who has been heavily involved with health professionals for Healthy Climate and helping us with this work, and has contributed to work that we have done to create a report on the health impacts of Line 3, which we've just got a link, I think, in the chat. This is a great resource that Conor contributed a lot of time and effort to, and we are so thankful for his work among all of the other projects that he is involved in addition to being a medical student and having to deal with all the challenges that entails. So without further ado, I would like to bring forward Conor, and please feel free to add any further information about yourself if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Brenna. It's really an honor to be here with so many people who have put so much time into this frontline effort of a public health issue that really impacts all of us. As a future health professional, I am looking down the line of my future patients, and I know that we're already feeling the health impacts of climate change and going on. We really need to start taking it seriously in order to, mitigate some of the really damaging effects that we have. And so I'll be talking about some of the specific impacts that line 3 will have on human health. And so if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So if anyone is not convinced, according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, increasing global temperatures due to greenhouse gases affect social and environmental determinants of health in a negative way. Line 3 will impact human health, and I'm going to be talking about 4 specific areas in which line 3 will be impacting human health. The first being climate change, the second being systemic racism, the third being gendered violence, and the fourth being the COVID-19 pandemic. If completed, the Line 3 oil pipeline will account for 4.28% of the US total greenhouse gas emissions, according to a figure that Andy outlined earlier about a total of greenhouse gas emissions being estimated to be about 273 million tons, as much as 50 coal plants. This will increase the warming of our climate and has already contributed to the prolongation of allergy seasons such as hay fevers, the increased spread of vector-borne illnesses such as Lyme's disease and mosquito-borne illnesses. And as Andy had mentioned, the route for Line 3 would impact water sources all across Minnesota, which is an important form of food security, and is an important form of carbon sequestration. So destroying these wetlands will make it harder for us to get the carbon that we're putting into the air back into the ground where it should be. If you go to the next slide. Oh, I think we skipped a couple. There we go, thank you. In Minnesota, we are faced with some of the largest health disparities amongst races, and this policy decision to construct Line 3 would only exacerbate those. We'll see most of those negative impacts disproportionately affecting Indigenous populations. As Andy mentioned, the Line 3 will run right through treaty territories of 1855 and have the potential to destroy thousands of acres of wetlands with potential spills. Specific to tar sands oil spills, it's mixed with a solvent that allows it to be transported that creates oil that is actually more dense than water. So as opposed to, say, the BP oil spill where you saw oil being scraped off the top of waters in the event of a spill, this oil will actually sink to the bottom. And in order to clean it up, you'd have to basically scrape the bottom of these water sources and completely destroy these wetlands and wild rice beds that are relied on by the Anishinaabe people for food, and it's an important cultural resources. Studies have shown that Indigenous populations that have switched to a more Western style diet have increased likelihood to develop diabetes and hyperlipidemia. And following the decision to go ahead with the construction of Line 3, the Environmental Justice Advisory Board, 12 of their 17 members resigned from the board, saying that they can no longer essentially pay lip service to a quote unquote war on Black and brown people. And if we could go to the next slide. Multiple studies have also shown an increase in gendered violence that is correlated with the extraction of natural resources. And one quote that I thought really summed that up very well, the situation is at the bottom in the third bullet point, the influx of well-paid male oil and gas workers living in temporary housing, often referred to as man camps, has coincided with a disturbing increase of sex trafficking of Native women. This in of itself is terrible and is on top of Native women already seeing some of the highest rates of sexual assault. It is really just adding fuel to the fire, and is reason in of itself to oppose this project. If we can go to the next slide. This all, of course, is coming at the time and of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Governor Walz and the MPCA greenlighted this project in the midst of a Thanksgiving surge in COVID-19 cases that authorized Enbridge Energy to ship 4,000 workers to rural Minnesota, threatening to overwhelm their healthcare infrastructure. And I think that is it.
Thank you so much, Connor. We really appreciate you coming tonight and sharing all this information about the health impacts of Line 3 and for all the work that you're doing on this issue. Definitely appreciated. So next to speak with us tonight, we have Dr. Laalitha Surapaneni, who is a physician who has been one of the strong leaders of health professionals for a healthy climate for many years and has really been our point person in all of our efforts around Line 3. And Laalitha is going to share with us some of the work that HPHC and other health professionals have been doing in organizing in opposition to Line 3. So without further ado, you can take it away.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for having me speak today. So I'm an assistant professor in general internal medicine, and I'm a practicing physician, a hospitalist. I have a public health degree from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. I am speaking to you today from traditional Dakota lands in Minnesota as a member of Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. I just wanted to share with you the work that health professionals have already done. I moved to Minnesota almost 2.5 years ago now, and I first learned about Line 3 when I came here. And I think the first piece of information that I learned was this was going to be an expanded pipeline that would go through the headwaters of the Mississippi, and that seemed like a really bad idea. So I wanted to find out more. And I was quickly overwhelmed by the amount of information that was already out there. So if any of you are feeling overwhelmed today, learning about all of the impacts that Line 3 has, I recognize that feeling. There's impacts to water, to wild rights, to treaty rights, and there's so much in the science of it. Then there's the entire regulatory process and how we wanted to engage with it. So that was definitely a learning curve. Throughout this process, I think one thing that I kept coming back to is that climate impact of 50 coal plants. And, that would never pass if we were proposing to build one coal plant in each state in the continental United States. And yet we're permitting this pipeline. And throughout this process, as I mentioned, there were many things that I did not know. And so I've been working with frontline groups who've been organizing and with many other science groups, including Science for the People. And so I am very privileged that I get to share some of the work that I've done in coalition with our partners. Next slide. So one of the places that we engaged, one of the regulatory agencies, Minnesota's Public Utilities Commission, has already been mentioned by Andy. And so in January of 2020, they were hearing about taking public comments in person on a couple of different permits. One of them was the certificate of need. So does Minnesota need an oil pipeline? And the other one was the route permit, which would be, is it safe for this pipeline to go through this particular route? And during this hearing, it was probably the hearing that I've been in where there were the most number of scientists. There were geologists, hydrologists, climate scientists, physicists, and then there were the youth, indigenous leaders who all advocated against the pipeline. And I think one of the testimonies that stuck with me that day was a mom who brought her infant, and she had her infant strapped to her, and she asked the commissioners, she said, look into my baby's eyes and tell her that she has a chance, that her generation has a chance. You will give them that chance and deny these permits. And unfortunately, as you've heard, they did go ahead and give a certificate of need for oil in a climate crisis. And next slide. So the next step for us was to also engage with Governor Walz and his office. The white paper that Conor shared, when we had gathered enough evidence around the health impacts of Line 3, we wanted to be sure that we shared it with all of our decision makers. So, scientists and youth went and spoke with Governor Walz, health professionals, doctors, nurses, public health people, psychologists, all sorts of health professionals came together to speak to Governor Walz's staff about the health impacts and asked them to not let this pipeline through. We sent in letters, we organized around COVID-19 as well, as you've already heard. And next slide. And one of the last steps for us was the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And this is where, it was the height of the pandemic, and a lot of us were already involved in clinical work. And the time that we were not spending caring for patients, we were working to organize online. And so a lot of medical students and health professionals gave online testimony. We all know in the science community now that it's not just enough to make the science. We have to give a voice to that science, which we did. We also used various science communication measures, including, the poster that you see here of equating wetlands to kidneys and kind of bringing that message so that it's easily accessible. We spoke with the media. We had, given interviews to The Guardian, and at the end of all of this, the water permits were still given. The Pollution Control Agency refused to look at climate impacts or the risk of oil spills. At the end of that, 12 out of 17 environmental justice advisory group members resigned, as Conor had mentioned. So, construction has already started, and some of you might be feeling, well, what's the point? Looks like everything's been done. Why are we talking about this now? And I do have some of those moments myself where I keep thinking, well, we've done this, this, and this. Well, what next? And why? Why am I going to wake up tomorrow morning and think of organizing for the next steps for Line 3? And I have my answer before I can even ask myself that question. As long as our frontline Indigenous women are putting their bodies on the line to protect their sacred land and water, I will stand with them and use my privilege. And the only way I know how to do that is do this work is with community, and that's with all of you. So today I'm inviting each and every one of you to use your privilege. We will give you more concrete, actions throughout the talk, but right now, I'm asking you to pledge to yourself 3 people that you will talk to about today's webinar, the issues of line 3 and line 5. So I'll pause for 30 seconds. I want you to think of 3 names and write them down so that you will talk to people about it. And I'll put 30 seconds on the clock. Okay, thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for using your platform, whatever that might be, to spread awareness and to take action, and to not just stop line 3 and line 5, but all of the tar sands oil pipelines that are a threat to the clean, healthy, and just future that we want to build, we need to build, and we can build together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laalitha, for your passion, as always, and for your inspiration, for sharing why you do this work, and for your commitment, and for that great suggestion of actually taking the time to think about those personal conversations. That's an incredibly important way that we can engage in this work. It's an action everyone can take and everyone should take. It's one of the first line responses we should have in all of our climate change work, is just make this conversation something that happens every day and, in every interaction. So because the theme of our whole webinar series is talking about what are the impacts across the entire Great Lakes region, we didn't want to focus just on this pipeline in Minnesota. Of course, arguably, line 3 does impact more than just one state, as it crosses North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, and will technically potentially impact waters that flow to the rest of the entire country. But there are pipelines all across the Great Lakes states, and there is an ongoing battle also happening across the border in Michigan. And we are really excited and grateful tonight to be able to have a partner who's been engaged in work against line 5 in Michigan, Liz Kirkwood, the executive director of FLOW. We're all really looking forward to learning more about the work that you've been doing and how we can also engage and take part in actions against line 5. So without further ado, Liz, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Brenna, and everybody this evening. This is it's a real honor to be here, and it just brings me joy to know that we are working across states on issues that connect so profoundly. And let's first move to the next slide, so you guys focus on the sense of place where I want to bring you over into the heart of the Great Lakes. And let me start off saying I had not even anticipated putting slides together because I knew that we had such a short time together, but I was pressured into it. So we need to make sure that we have more time for these conversations, because it does take more time to understand what is at stake. But I want to tell you a story about the Line 5 pipeline, which is a 645-mile pipeline that connects to Line 3 in Superior, Wisconsin, and traverses across the Upper Peninsula. And then it literally is operating and is exposed in the open waters of Great Lakes at the Straits of Mackinac, and then traverses back on land through northern lower Michigan and to Sarnia. And what I want to share with you just with this image is just to take stock for a moment about the extraordinary gift that we have here in the Great Lakes, with 20% of the world's fresh surface water, that we are risking with the continued operation of Line 5 68 years ago. This was built in 1953, coming out of World War II. And this is a battle for the future of the Great Lakes. And what we are facing here is slightly different from Line 5, but it's part of Energy's larger energy system. And we know that pipelines located in one of the worst possible places for an oil spill, in a location where you have currents that are 10 times the volume of Niagara Falls, will eventually fail. And we have had anchor strikes hit this pipeline, 3 in fact over the last 2 years. And it's extraordinary that this pipeline has not ruptured. The health impacts of this of rupture in a catastrophic oil spill in the heart of the Great Lakes would just be unprecedented. It has unbelievable impacts to the treaty rights. There are 5 federally recognized tribes at the Straits of Mackinac, and it is one of the most pristine areas for the shoreline wetlands, and there are about 50,000 raptors coming into this area. You can imagine how important this area is. And somebody's saying, what's an anchor strike? So this also is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the Great Lakes. And one of a tugboat dropped its anchor because of the wild currents and struck these pipelines. I want to move very quickly because I want to show you some other images. Let's go to the next one. Many people in Michigan didn't even know about the location of Line 5 until over 11 years ago. Michigan faced one of the largest inland oil spills in U.S. history. It was that other line that you saw in the image, Line 6B. Let's go to the next slide, please. This pipeline leaked for over 17 hours. Next slide. And dumped over 1 million gallons of this heavy tar sands. And the Conor's comments about the difficulty of cleaning up tar sands cannot be overemphasized. Next. And then, of course, when you think about the Great Lakes, the impacts to all the drinking water supply systems is tremendous. I don't know if you can see, this is a view from the north. I'm looking down. That's the Mackinac Bridge that was built in 1957. And the pipelines are located, well, in this case, just to the west. And they are, about 250 feet below the surface. So imagine an anchor hitting and striking it as you're having these huge barges come through here. So what makes this fight, well, at the heart of this fight is the fact that this pipeline is occupying public trust waters and bottomlands. And if the state of Michigan had not issued this easement back in 1953, this pipeline could never have occupied this location. And the reason, of course, it was chosen, it was much easier to locate this pipeline through the shortcut in the Great Lakes rather than building around the rocky shores in northern Georgian Bay, where the geology is much harder to build pipelines. And what I want to tell you about is that for the last 7-8 years, we have been begging the state of Michigan to revoke the public trust easement and protect the paramount interests of the waters rather than Enbridge. And on November 13th in 2020, Governor Whitmer listened after we had compiled, the scientific reports, the economic reports, the legal analysis, because she knows that this is the only way we can finally decommission. Actually, would be the first pipeline in America, actually, if this happens. And so on November 13th, the notice was revoked and was filed in state court. And not surprising, Enbridge has tried to bring it into federal court. And they are arguing that this is a federal matter and that federal pipeline safety regulations should preempt state sovereign waters. And we know that that can't be the case. If you could have a multinational corporation come into your state to tell you they get to do whatever it is that they want to the waters that are protected in perpetuity by each and every state as a sovereign public trustee. I want to just also let you know that in addition to the effort to decommission the current pipeline, Enbridge simultaneously, under the last governor, negotiated a tunnel agreement to construct a tunnel underneath the Great Lakes that would be a mega infrastructure pipeline project that would cost, probably on the order of $1 billion+. And in order to proceed with that, we currently are facing state and federal permitting regulations similar to what's happening with Line 3. And we unfortunately have had, similar again to Minnesota, our environmental agency here, which is EGLE, which is the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, on January 29th, just approved wetlands permits and water discharge permits so that they can build this tunnel. And today we just heard from Michigan Public Service Commission, the MPSC, that the scope of their review will not examine climate change impacts, which is quite extraordinary since Enbridge intends to own and operate this tunnel for the next 99 years. So the bright spot is that the Army Corps of Engineers has to approve this tunnel project, and similarly, we are demanding a full environmental impact statement and review. It's a busy time. It's the moment to really take action, and we have the attention of the Biden administration, their commitment to climate change, as well as the commitment of individual states. In Michigan, for example, Governor Whitmer has vowed under an executive order last fall to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. It's still far off there, but the operation of Line 5 would similarly displace our ability to ever achieve those goals. The last thing I just want to mention to you all is that this is the battle is tremendous, not only within the state, but now also with Canada, because Line 5, as it turns out, is primarily a pipeline that is transporting it's light crude oil and natural gas liquids to benefit Canada. There are issues about propane for the Upper Peninsula residents. Those are very minor issues that can be made with adjustments for a couple of rail cars that can be put on some short spurs. But the pressure in Canada is extraordinary, and so reach out to Canadian friends and First Nations and NGOs is really, really critical. And we know there's tremendous pressure against us. And the last thing I will just say is that your voices as medical professionals, as public health professionals, it carries so much weight. The incredible work that you have done during this pandemic has made all of the difference. It's literally what's kept it all together. And the future of one of the most important fresh surface water bodies on the planet is at stake here in this Line 5 battle, as well as with Line 3. It's all interconnected, and I just want to appreciate you for all the work and activism that you take in your professional and personal lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. We really appreciate all of that information and the perspective you've shared. And that slide that you showed, the image of the map with the Great Lakes at the center, I know that some folks in the chat were talking about how, this is, I'm sorry, you weren't finished yet? Well, you have more slides.
Oh, I told you I had way too many slides. You can just go through these, this is what a spill would look like. You just keep scrolling, and because we want to hear the questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you had time to cover all of your information. I apologize if I misread that cue. We did have some questions about how long the webinar is going to last. We have actually designated another half hour for this to go until 7:30 Central Time, because we wanted to make sure to give time for all of our speakers to speak, as well as to have the opportunity for folks to actually ask questions of our panel. So hopefully, if you have questions that you've been raring to ask and are gearing up for those, then you have the opportunity to stick with us and get those questions asked. And again, I apologize, Liz, if I cut you off. I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the information you shared, for the images you shared. I think that map that really showed how interconnected we are, how central those lakes are, was so compelling. Somebody in the chat mentioned that really shows how much we are connected, and that's really why we are together in this regional webinar series to talk about how connected we are and how large this issue is. But we actually wanted to take time right now during the webinar before we run to questions to give you yet another opportunity to be involved right here and now in taking action on this issue. So we actually have prepared petitions to reach out to the Biden administration to use their powers to take action, against both Line 3 and Line 5. It's at this point where our federal government has the power. These are issues that impact all of us. This is something that we absolutely need to be working together on if we're going to actually meet some of the goals that the Biden administration has laid out in their climate plan. Continued expansion of tar sands oil and impacts on marginalized communities, the environmental justice issue. These are all things that have been brought up in his climate plan, that they are going to be actually putting these communities first, and therefore we think that they need to take action. So we wanted to share with you, Alex has just posted a link in the chat to a petition that is calling on the Biden administration to revoke the permits for Line 3. And we also have a petition that is calling on the Biden administration to stand in solidarity with Governor Whitmer and not allow this continued construction or replacement tunnel for Line 5. So we wanted to take a moment right now where we're all here together. Everyone, please go ahead and click on these links, add your name to these sign-on letters. We'll be making sure that they actually end up in the hands of the Biden administration. And we are really hoping to leverage our voices as health professionals, these trusted voices, the weight of all of our credentials from all the time that we spent in school, earning those letters behind our name that people seem to find so important. Those are things that we can bring to bear on this fight in a way that we can all be involved. So
Brenna, one question that's in the chat is, what happens if you sign a second time? You think you've already signed and you might be signing again?
Sure, when we're going through and compiling all of the signatures and everything, folks will take care of that. So it won't impact, you won't look like you've signed up multiple times. just one signature will actually get to the Biden administration. Great. Well, while we're giving everybody the opportunity to go ahead and take that action, we also, we're bringing up some slides on ways that you can also take action via social media. So folks who are social media users, here's a question of language that you could share to reach out to the Biden administration. And we also have an important document that was created by our partners at Minnesota 350. That is a fantastic resource for ways to become involved in frontline action in the movement against Line 3. Groups that are the frontline camp formers who are needing aid and supplies. So ways that you can actually donate monetarily, donate supplies, ways that you can follow these groups and augment their voices on social media. All of these options are available and documented in that resource from MM350. And we've been having a really great amount of questions and dialogue and discussion in the chat throughout the presentations, which has been really fantastic. And we also did want to give folks the opportunity to directly ask questions to our panel of speakers and have them answered in real time as well. So as folks are wrapping up signing those petitions, if you do have questions from our panelists, you can feel free to type those questions into the chat and we'll make sure to share them. But also we can move to where if you would like to use the raise hand feature on Zoom, we could call on you and you could actually speak your question directly as well. And we can actually also kind of go back into the chat and see if there are any outstanding questions that haven't been answered yet, or that were brought up in the chat that we would like to also discuss a little bit more among our panel of speakers. So I'm going to give folks another maybe 30 seconds to finish up our action of signing the petitions, and then we'll get rolling with asking our panelists to answer some questions for us. Okay, so is everybody finished up with signing petitions? Thanks so much for taking action and for staying with us on this webinar. So we have some questions that are coming up. I know that we also had some questions that were kind of earlier in the chat that were around the economics of this whole project. And there was some discussion there. I think that Andy had brought up some points about that as well, but just sort of how can these pipelines still be profitable? What are some of the projections, things like that? Did you want to maybe give some summation points about that, Andy, or any of other speakers, if you have some, just so we can kind of cover that in real time?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Rana, and we'll also love to hear from others too. Yeah, the economics of it are tricky, right? I mean, it seems like a really bad deal is some of what we're seeing in the chat. And it is. This is a project that's driven by the Canadian extractive industry that's tied to the tar sands and doesn't really have investments anywhere else. We saw BP and most of the multinationals that had projects in the tar sands get out starting about 5 years ago. So the producers that are still there are the ones that this is all they do. So because they can't move oil profitably without new pipeline capacity to let them do it, their business model depends on having new pipelines come online, because pipeline is expensive to build, but you can recover the cost of building it through tariffs that you get government approval for, to basically increase the, basically the price of your oil, essentially recover it through the cost of oil. And at that point, because the overall costs of a pipeline are pretty low to transport, to use in that way, it keeps the industry kind of gasping along a little bit longer, right? In a way that truck transportation, rail transportation, you cannot justify a new mine if those are your takeaway options. And we know this in part because every time that a pipeline project is delayed or canceled, you see over the next several months just a raft of project cancellations up in Canada. And it's wild to track it. You can look at, when the first time Keystone XL was stopped, we saw 5 mining projects, huge carbon, concentrations just completely written off. The companies gave up, walked away from these projects. And you see that, you see it after delay, you see it after cancellation. The industry clearly understands that their takeaway is dependent on the pipelines. And, it is a really expensive type of oil to move. So, to extract. And so it's kind of always on the edge of profitability in a low oil price environment, but it can just push over it a little bit with a pipeline. Anybody want to expand on that?
Yeah, Andy, I was going to say that specific to Line 3, I think one of the arguments from the very beginning has been that this is a replacement pipeline. And I think that definitely muddied the waters a lot in terms of communicating what the pipeline actually is to the general public, which is clearly a doubling of capacity. It's in a new route, and they're not removing the pipe that will be left in the ground unless landowners specifically ask for it. So, instead of calling it an expansion, rerouting, and an abandonment, they've called it a replacement. And so I think that's been some of the cause for, a split in the conversation.
I'll just add that is a tactic that Enbridge has mounted extremely successful in each of these pipeline fights, because in the wake of the Keystone battle that has raged on for over a decade, what Enbridge has done very strategically is focus the expansion of all the different pipelines in Minnesota and Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan. And when Enbridge caused one of the largest disasters this country has ever seen in Michigan, that happened just after the BP Horizon spill, guess what? They were able to, again, call it a replacement line for Line 6B, and they doubled the capacity, and they swore in the Michigan Public Service Commission that would satisfy all their future needs. And we see that, and yet they, the state didn't take that opportunity to say, well, if that is going to satisfy all of your needs, Enbridge, we're going to shut down Line 5, and that's it. But there was never a focus on looking at cumulative impacts. And, I will just say that both under Minnesota law, under Michigan law, and also under federal law, the environmental statutes are specifically designed to address this segmentation of projects. And this is a very important point. And it leads to, if you took an analogy of looking at a human body, it would be like, if you're a foot doctor, you can only look at the foot and you can never look at any other part of the body to understand how anything's happening. And what's happening is that many of the state and the federal agencies are failing to look at these cumulative impacts about climate change, et cetera. And breaking that narrative for people to really understand what's at stake is critical.
Yeah, thanks for that point. I mean, there's also this issue of we have to figure in the actual costs of these projects, and health impacts and associated costs are definitely a big point in that has been neglected in those calculations. So I know that we have some folks who've raised their hands and more questions in the chat. And I think Wilmer, you've been waiting for a while. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, bonjour, Anin. Wabagishi Gigaki Atikdodem. White Raven from Magnetawan First Nation. I'm indigenous to North America, Canada. And I just saw this webinar float by social media, and I was very interested because I recently found out that Line 5 was coming up this way and getting rerouted rather than going south. So I'm here for information, and I'm currently in Toronto. So I'm willing to get all kinds of information and do organizing. So I'm just here for information and wanted to say thank yous all, everybody in this room, for all the work that you're doing. Very much appreciate it. Miigwech.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you coming. And if you have any ideas on things that we could be doing that you think the health professional community should be doing in this issue, we're happy to hear it. But also hopefully some of these resources will be helpful to you to plug into as well and share with folks in your community. So I think that Hannah, you've had your hand up for a while as well. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, I just found this just when I was looking online about things I could get involved with a little bit in Michigan about the environment. And I just wanted to make sure I understand what's happening a little bit. People were saying a lot of things that I wasn't quite following. So this might not be the highest level of question, but I just wanted to make sure I understand the concepts. So there's I'll just say my understanding real quick, which is there's the pipeline 3, which would be a rerouting and increased capacity for an existing pipeline. And I was wondering like why they're rerouting it. And then the pipeline 5 one, my understanding, it already exists going through like the Mackinac Bridge area and brings oil from Canada. And I was wondering, like, so is the issue there just trying to have them route oil through like the Wisconsin area and not go through the lake? Or is it like, I don't know. So that's kind of my questions. Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your clarifying questions, Hannah. This has been a lot of information to cover, and especially because we're looking at, two different projects in this region that are, of course, interconnected, and that it's the same industry and, the ultimate idea. I think that it seems like Andy and Liz would be the best folks to answer these questions for you if you guys wanted to clarify the routing and why the replacements are needed.
I'm happy to. From Minnesota for the Line 3 situation, Hannah, we call it a new pipeline, not a replacement. The reason for that is because it carries a different product, this heavy tar sands. It is bigger, it's 3 feet in diameter, and it is in a different location for about half of the route in Minnesota. And you could also call it a reroute or a replacement. Enbridge does. That's kind of what you consider a replacement, and at what point does it become a new pipeline? It's almost more of a philosophical question than anything. Sure. But that's the situation there. And I've seen some of the questions in the chat here too, and maybe just to touch on those at the same time as part of yours, the reasons for the reroute, or the reasons that it's not just right in the same trench.
Right.
They're going to leave the old pipe underground, so they're not actually removing it at all. They're gonna let it kind of sit down there and rot away underground over time. And also the old pipeline runs across the Leech Lake Reservation, Leech Lake Nation, and they wanted it gone off of their land. And there's a really important difference here between treaty territory and reservation boundaries. Within the boundaries of a reservation, a tribal nation, can say, you're just not allowed to do that. And they're a sovereign nation. They're absolutely allowed to just not have a pipeline built across the reservation at all. Right. So Leech Lake basically said, we're not gonna let you like renew these easements, have to be renewed every few decades to get pipelines across, the reservation. When I talk about treaty territory, I talk about the larger area in which the tribal members or treaty descendants have rights to hunt, fish, and gather, what we might call usufructuary rights. So those are rights that, that pertain to an area which is outside of the boundary of a reservation. And so that's where the pipeline is running. So basically, for the most part, they put it around places where the tribes have easy legal means to say no, even though they do not consent. And in my view, it is illegal because it's a taking of their treaty rights by the impacts of construction and the potential impacts of oil spills. Don't know if that made it any clearer, but I hope so. That's
okay. That is
line
helpful.
3.
Yeah.
Let's go over to line 5 then. Over to Liz.
Andy, I thought you did a great job as usual. And Hannah, thanks for your question. So the landscape is confusing. And as Andy alluded to, Enbridge tries to do that. And so two things are happening. The first priority is to shut down Line 5 because of the extraordinary risks that it poses to the Great Lakes. It's I didn't show you pictures, but the pipeline is literally failing. It is collapsing. There are over 200 structures that they call anchors that are shifting, that are supposed to be propping up this pipeline, and it's moving because the currents are so powerful. So that's priority number one. And Governor Whitmer has revoked the easement and permission for Enbridge to occupy our public waters in the Great Lakes. And because it's in Lake Michigan, the state of Michigan has jurisdiction. That's why it's not there's no international boundary affecting Line 5. At the same time, Enbridge also is concurrently seeking permits to build a tunnel under the Great Lakes in identical location. So imagine operating these extremely dangerous pipelines and building a tunnel underneath the lake bed floor. And there are cultural underwater sites that have been identified that are, again, prone to disruption if you have the tunnel boring machine drilling underneath the lake bed. That idea just terrifies me. What I was going to say, though, is to your larger question, Hannah, about is that, in terms of so Line 5 is connected to Superior and Line 3. So a lot of the tar sands they're refined in Superior, and then the sweet crude oil and the natural gas liquids are transported in Line 5. These products, the demand for it is going down. 17 major tar sands projects have been canceled in the last 5 years. We've seen incredible divestment. 7 of the international, big corporations are getting out of Alberta, and we are seeing a transition. As I also mentioned, Hannah, Line 6B, which is now called 78 in Michigan, has doubled capacity, and the need can be supplemented by, other pipelines, and we're not here to shift the burden to other areas. But what we do know is that you cannot have a 68-year-old pipeline operating in the open waters of the Great Lakes, where there is shipping traffic that is, making it this extraordinary hazard. And I also wanted to mention that Line 5 also traverses through the Bad River Band in Wisconsin through a 12-mile stretch. And there are a number of easements, some that have, expired, some that have not. And that has led to a lawsuit that makes this issue, thorny. And early on we thought, wouldn't this be great if the tribes could stop Line 5 right there? But, litigation is protracted and continues. So anyway, Hannah, I hope I've answered some of your questions. These are not easy.
Okay, yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Could I add on something, Brenna? I've been seeing that the chat is very active, and so I wanted to kind of address some of the points. There were a lot of questions about health impacts and where can we find information. So I put in some links for the, NRDC's paper on health risks of tar sands. And, I think someone had also asked about, well, what will it take to wake people up? I think that's a question that we ask ourselves every day. And so far, the conversation has been kind of clustered within the, climate environment type of conversation. And that's where I think we as health professionals can really play a role to show those intersections, like Conor had mentioned, and we've all talked about of pipeline and water and how water links to our health, how does climate impact our health, and any number of other things that you've heard today, and that this is not just an environmental issue, this is a people and a human health issue. And that's why we encourage you to continue to have those conversations. And I know as health professionals, we don't like to talk about things that we don't understand. And I had that problem in the beginning too, that I found this very confusing. I made myself a 4x4 table when I first, one of the first things I did when I came to Minnesota is, what do I know? And, and what do I don't know? And what needs to be done? And what can I do? Those were like my two things. What do I know? And what can I do? And then I found myself in that climate and health space. I mean, clearly the climate impact was overwhelming. And I know that climate and health impacts, I know that. And once I started there, then yes, of course, it took me 2 years, and there's so many things I still don't know about the Line 3 and Line 5 fight. But yeah, I think we can continue to work on that message of climate and health. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Laalitha, for bringing that up. As aforementioned, there's been some discussion of health impacts in the chat, and there are resources out there to try to bring everybody up to speed on that. And a lot of them, or at least the ones from our organization, were prepared by Laalitha for that very same reason that she's sort of alluding to. Like we do want to have enough information that we can arm ourselves and make a difference, figure out where we can actually, what we can bring to bear on this. And so I think, yeah, to kind of clarify the health impacts questions that were in the chat, the process does have health impacts from start to finish, from extraction to refining to then the ultimate combustion. Our report kind of goes into some of that, and then the NRDC report that Laalitha had also posted. Do we have any further outstanding questions that haven't been addressed by the speakers or by some of the resources in the chat? Does anybody else want to raise their hand and ask a question? Laalitha wants to ask a question or make a clarifying point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, a clarifying point. So because, we spoke about kind of like Line 3 and Line 5, so that's Minnesota, Michigan, but I am not sure what the impacts of other pipelines are. So what we had done was, several months of just looking through the literature. And we first started off with our environmental impact statement and then tried to find out what those individual impacts are in relation to health, and did lots of literature review. And so if anyone is thinking about, where are the resources in my state or my community, please, I'll put my email in the chat. Please reach out to me or reach out to Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate, and we can point you in the direction of like how we kind of did the white paper and did our research. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we have a few more minutes before we were intending to end the webinar. And I think Laalitha kind of alluded to an important question that I would like to press to our panel of speakers, and that is, what has inspired you to be involved in this fight, and what keeps you going? So I don't know if we want to call on somebody to start that or go in the order of our presenters. I guess we'll put it to Andy first then. What inspired you to be involved in the pipeline fight and what keeps you going?
Well, I want to actually say, just credit where credit's due. It was Marty Kobenes, who used to organize with Indigenous Environmental Network, who got MN350 and me involved in the Line 3 fight. In so many ways, this movement has been led by Native folks. And what was happening there was we were involved with the Keystone XL fight here in Minnesota because it was a big national deal. Marty said, "That's great. I'm so glad you are. Did you know there were pipelines in Minnesota?" And we really didn't know. And it just goes to show that, it's always in the company's interest that people don't know about the infrastructure that's kind of in their own backyards. And so I feel really grateful for his work that he did with our group in Minnesota to, kind of bring us in, took us up and showed us around and saw the pipeline, walked on the easement, got to actually see it and make that connection to it. And I think that that's a really key thing is, these fights they're grounded to a specific place, right? And it's in the nature of these fights that they have really strong connections to place. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks so much, Andy. I got pass it to Conor.
I think that is a great point, Andy, about how these fights are so grounded in place. And that's really what's kind of driven me towards this fight. I first learned in depth about the Line 3 fight from Laalitha Surapaneni. So I have a lot of credit to give to her for my involvement in all of this. And what keeps me going has very much been these events and meeting with organizers who are also as passionate about these issues as I am, and knowing that this is what is best for my future patients. So keeping that in mind when some decisions don't go our way. So that's really what's been keeping me going.
Thanks so much, Conor. Laalitha, I guess you want to expand on some of your inspiration that you were alluding to earlier?
Oh, I think in the interest of time, I'll turn it over to Liz. Thank you.
Well, as an environmental lawyer, place and water has always, I've always been drawn to places rich in water. And I discovered my love of being near water when I lived out in the desert. And I love my time there. And so when I came to the Great Lakes, I knew that I wanted to be working on these big issues about the future of water and the planet, because water is life. And specifically, I attribute finding out about Line 5 from a friend of mine here in Traverse City, Glenn Chown, who is this amazing conservation leader for the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, one of the most wonderful land conservancies. And we went out for coffee one day and he said, Liz, and we were looking over at the bay out into the lake, and he said, there's this old pipeline that's in the water, and I think you should work on it and get it out of there. I said, oh, okay, that sounds really easy. And no, I didn't say that. But that definitely changed everything. And then my good friends over at Groundwork Senate and TC350.org and some other groups and actually 350.org, they organized a rally at the Straits of Mackinac. This is back, I can't remember, it was 2013 or 14. And Bill McKibben showed up, and there were like 450 people at the Straits, and we're like, we're going to shut this thing down, like it'll take a year or something. And, year after year goes by. But the movement has only grown stronger. amazing people like Beth Wallace from the National Wildlife Federation, who was from the Kalamazoo area, helped put Line 5 on the map. It's the whole journey of this has really created the relationships with people of all communities, the tribes and their extraordinary leadership has just been an absolute privilege. And I'm really, really proud to say that Chairman Brian Newland from the Bay Mills Indian community is now going to be an assistant secretary at Department of Indian Affairs. And, these issues really matter. And I wanted to say one other thing, which is that because when we started doing this work, when we had a very conservative government, the focus was really about water, because water and the Great Lakes is something that unites all of us and transcends the kind of partisan fighting that we've seen. And the messaging of our work has changed appropriately. And we now talk about the climate change impacts and the health impacts. And that's an interesting thing just to see within a campaign. And it's both and I want to give a plug for water, because water we need to heal the water. It's every arc of the water cycle that is broken. And that's what climate change, that's what's happening, rivers of water in the sky. And so I don't know, I can't imagine doing anything else.
Thank you so much for sharing your inspiration, Liz. And thanks everybody for sharing these great stories about your journeys and movement building. And I like that there was this touchstone of everyone was inspired by great leaders, and you are becoming and have become great leaders yourselves. And that's really a testament to what this work is about in movement building. We're at the time for what we had designated as our time together this evening, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So everyone can feel free to move on with your evening. We will be providing recording to this webinar and many of the resources that we shared in a follow-up email to all registrants to the webinar. I think that there are some folks who maybe still had some burning questions, and I don't know, I want to make sure that our panelists have the opportunity to bow out gracefully now if you have other things that you would like to get to. If other folks still have some burning questions that you'd like to ask, though, maybe we could stay a little longer. It's kind of up to everyone, but thanks so much for everyone who did attend. And again, thank you so much to our speakers. Thanks to everybody for joining us in this fight, for your dedication and commitment, and for caring about the water, caring about Indigenous rights, and caring about the health of everyone.
I just wanted to say one quick thing before we all go. I wanted to share a perspective on water, right? As a man spiritually, and my responsibility as a firekeeper, right? But I'm a single father to a daughter. So I also have the responsibility of thinking of water and carrying that water for my daughter here, right? So I thought a lot about water and the way that water works and the way that we use it, right? Our body is 80% water, right? At one point, the water that's in my body was in the body of one of my ancestors, right? And someday, I drink that water in the morning and I pee it out and it goes through its whole cycle and it goes back, right? Well, the water in our body does the same thing, right? This water that I carry in my body is going to go back into those systems, and then when another life is created, that same water is going to be passed on to the next generation. So it's not just that water is life. We are water, right? Just like the earth is mostly covered in water, the main thing that moves the electricity around in our body is the nervous system and the water, right? It's the main conductor of our conscious being. right? At least that's the way I see it. And so water is a lot more than just life. It's who we are, not just as indigenous people, but as people from this planet. And just felt it was really important to share that with y'all because I really appreciate all the work you're doing. And I'll put my email in the box, and please send me information, specifically on Line 5 stuff and coming up towards Canada. I'm really interested in all that stuff. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Thank you